Welcome to Myositis Support and Understanding. Today, Fiona joins us for a patient-led education session, Myositis and Exercise, based on the Helene Alexanderson Functional Index-2. Fiona joins us from France. She has dermatomyositis with the MDA5 antibody. Please note that this is not medical advice, and you should always consult your healthcare team prior to making any changes in your care. The slides used in today's sessions are available on our website at understandingmyositis.org/exercise. Fiona, we are so happy to have you join us today to share your knowledge and personal experience with exercise and the Functional Index-2.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm delighted to be here, very happy. So just in a few minutes, just briefly explain, so I have dermatomyositis with the MDA5 antibody. It started 4 years ago and it went downhill very quickly in a matter of a few weeks. I couldn't move my arms, legs, or my neck. It was a very slow uphill, but 4 years later, I'm doing absolutely fine. And this is mainly due to the research done by Helene Alexanderson in Sweden, and exercising along with the Functional Index-2. So the aim was to present exactly what the Functional Index-2 is, and so that you could see how I used it to help me progress. So I'm not a doctor. This is just my personal experience. Whatever I say, please, it's not because it worked for me that it's going to work for you. If you can, ask your PT to help you. Jerry is going to put online the 2 PowerPoints that I'm showing on the Functional Index-2 and the intensive resistance training. And if you're like me, your PT knows nothing about it. Well, I showed the Functional Index-2 to my PT, translated it because I live in France, and she helped me progress. So just be careful because you can really hurt your muscles. Still, the Functional Index-2 exists, and I think it's absolutely wonderful to have people who are working out there to help us progress and who do these PowerPoints so that we can exchange and help us build muscles. So the first PowerPoint, I'm going to divide my the video into 3 parts. The first part is the Functional Index-2. The second part is the intensive resistance training, and the third part is stretching. So the first part, Functional Index-2, is a group of exercises that are meant originally to test muscle strength for patients who have myositis. But doctors use this exercise, this test, to help patients progress. They use it as a regular exercise. And so you do it every 2 days, never 2 days in a row, every 2 days, and you start very low. And you build up progressively. The intensive resistance training is once your muscle disease is under control. And so you really start building muscles with weights. And the stretching is, the third part is very important. You never stretch if you don't exercise, but you always stretch after your exercise. So it's not in the Functional Index, but I'll just show you the type of exercises that I do that really help. And even today, so I've just come back from my holidays hiking in the Alps. Even today, when I hike, when I do my exercises, I always do my stretching. It just feels wonderful. So the first part is the Functional Index-2. So as you can see, what's written, Helene Alexanderson, she's a PT in Sweden, and she's been working with a doctor, and her specialty is myositis. And I remember very clearly, I saw her, and she talked about a patient who had myositis, and at the time, they didn't encourage myositis patients to do exercise. And she had a patient who came in and who did push-ups in front of her. And she thought, maybe we should work on building muscles with our myositis patients. And so this patient was sort of gave her a realization that maybe we should study this. And so you can see the Functional Index-2 that I'm showing you was done by Helene Alexanderson. So she writes here, it's a disease-specific functional outcome assessing muscle endurance in polymyositis and dermatomyositis. So that's it. Originally, it was just a way to test muscle strength among myositis patients. So she explains the equipment you need a chair without back or arm support. You need a bench with horizontal head support, a pillow. You need a 1 kilo weight cuff, and you need a digital metronome. So I'm going to pass on to she explains that you have to do it every 2 days. Well, no, when you do the test, you just do it once, and then they register the muscle strength. And then when the patient comes back, let's say 6 months later, they do it again, and they see how the patient has progressed. So she explains in this slide that the functional index 2 is a version of another functional index where redundant tasks have been excluded. And the functional index 2 task correlated best with measures of muscle endurance. So this is a sort of a progress in research that they're doing. And so I'll just pass on to the next one. Instructions. So the instructions for the test is you perform as many repetitions of each task as you can, or you stop when you've reached the maximum number of repetitions. However, you decide when to stop due to muscle fatigue, pain, or general fatigue. So there's a big difference between the test and the exercise that you do every 2 days. When you do the test, you try and reach the maximum because you want to prove, if you're a positive person, that you've improved. But when you do it every 2 days, you really have to pay attention not to push yourself too hard, because if you push your muscles, then you hurt yourself, and then you can't exercise for a few days. And it's a sort of a vicious circle. So I'll explain the Borg scale, how to feel when you know that you're not supposed to push yourself too hard. She explains it. And I'll insist on that a little later, because that's really very difficult part of progressing. So instructions to the observer: the number of correct performed repetitions following 5 learning repetitions are registered for each task. So I'm going to pass on this because it's really aimed for doctors and the test. So this is the Borg scale. The Borg scale is a very interesting scale. It's sort of an impression scale of the difficulty that you feel in doing something. If you say 0 on the Borg scale, it's very easy. Like for me, it would be picking up the glass. It's nothing at all. It used to be very difficult. It used to be where I had to take the glass with both hands, and it was very difficult. And then at that time, there was a time where it was literally impossible. So, but when I started getting better, maybe after a year with the disease, I had to take it with both hands, and I had problems, but I still could drink. So now it would be a 0, but there was a time when it would be heavy, and so you can see here it would be a 5. There was a time when opening this bottle was absolutely impossible. Now I can do it. So it's not nothing at all. I would say now it would be light or moderate to, because of the strength that I would need to open it. But there was a time when it was impossible. So what Helene Alexanderson says is that when you're exercising, not during the test, but when you're exercising, you're supposed to be at the level somewhat strong when your muscle disease is active. Once your muscle disease is not active anymore, you can push up to very strong. And when you do the intensive resistance training, you push up to very strong. But so long as you're in the functional index at the basic level where you're still trying to improve, then you go to somewhat strong. And I think that's really interesting. It's when you do your exercise and you start feeling that it's difficult, and that's when you start, that's somewhat strong, and then you stop. You could go further, but you don't. And the next day you do nothing, and the day after you do one more. So for instance, if you raise your arm once, let's say 5 times, and it's when you reach 5, it's somewhat strong, somewhat hard, you stop. You could do 10, but you don't do 10. You do If it's 5, you do 5. Then the next day you do nothing. And then the next day you do 6. And then the next day you do nothing. And the next day you do 7. And you build up progressively every 2 days, starting from somewhat strong, how you feel at the beginning. So it's not very easy. It seems easy. That's the way it worked for me. But there were some times when I went downhill, like in the day. I would take my coat in the morning and then think, whoa, who put, liters of water in my coat pockets? And I looked and there were no liters of water. It was just my muscle strength. I'd lost some of it during the day. And so I had to go back down and then build up again. And so during the first, maybe the first 2 years, there were ups and downs. Sometimes they were major downs. I couldn't cross the street anymore. I was so afraid I couldn't cross it. Because I was so weak, so I had to go back down. But then after a year, I was able to walk half an hour. And then after 2 years, I was able to walk 2 hours. And I could walk in the mountains, but it wasn't really going uphill. It was really, more like small hills. But still, I could walk up to 2 hours. After 3 years, so that was last year, I could walk 1,000 meters up, 1,000 meters down, and I could walk up to, I started progressively in the mountains, and from 1 hour to 2 hours up to 8 hours during the day. And this summer, so it's 4 years later, I walked 100 miles and during 3 weeks, and I was hiking up and down, up and down. But even at the beginning of the holidays, I was just walking an hour, and I built up progressively over a week. And it was after the end of the second week that I was really building. So so what I did was incredible, but it's always very progressive. So these are the exercises for the functional index. So the first exercise is you sit on a chair without back support with 1 kilo weight cuffs around your wrist. And so you can see she's sitting, and you start with the right arm. You perform as many repetitions as possible, then you switch sides. So I was incapable of doing it with 1 kilo weights. So I just started with nothing. I just, you put your arm once and that's good. And then 2 days later, you put your arm up against twice. So the sheet says that you have to put a pace. So you need a metronome. So that's what I had my daughter's piano metronome. And you put it on 40 beats a minute, and that's 20 repetitions a minute. So roughly, it's like tuck, 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 roughly. I had the metronome on for maybe a year and a half. Now I don't need it anymore, but I don't do the functional. I do still do that one though, that exercise every 2 days. So you sit and you put your arm once, even if it's with nothing. And if at 1 is fine for you and you feel it's 4, or even if you can't put it up all the way, it doesn't matter. If it's just straight up to the level of your shoulder, you leave it up to your shoulder and then you go down. And then 2 days later, maybe you'll try up to the top of your head and then you stop. And then 2 days later, you try and go a little higher. And she says, you have to progress. You always have to do better than the time before. So unless you really feel, you're having a flare, then you don't do it, okay? But if you're not having a special flare, then you try and progress. And it's strange because at the beginning, you feel you can do more because you started at 4 at the Borg scale. But it's very important not to do 2 more because that's how you can progress. Before, with my PT, she tried to make me do more. And every time it hurt for 3 days. And then she did it again. And then it would hurt again. And it's only when she left on holiday for a week that I realized my muscles weren't hurting very much. And that's when I realized she was doing too much. And with the functional index, I said, okay, I'm just going back to 1. And so I started at 1. And then 2 days later, I was at 2. And so you're supposed to reach 60. So if you do every 2 days, it's going to take you at least 120 days. So that's 4 months. So it probably took more because I had ups and downs, but I was very patient. I know with this disease, we're not supposed to be in a rush. And by the time you get to 60, you're already in a good shape. So that was a shoulder flexion. So you do the right hand first, and then you do the left hand. So it's interesting. What she says also that's important is you do the top, like you do your arms first, and then you do your legs. And then you do another exercise with your arms, and then you do another exercise with your legs. You don't do the 2 exercises with your arms first, and then the 2 exercises with your legs first. You alternate. Always right, left, top, and then right, left, bottom, so that your muscles can relax in between the exercises. You can put a 1-minute pause in between each exercise if you want. And always have a bottle of water with you to drink, have sips of water during the exercise. Also, what I do is I always eat 15 minutes before. I have protein. I take a glass of lactose-free milk and maybe a half a banana. And 15 minutes later, it gives me the impression that I probably do. I have more energy. So it's important to, when you're, for me, but I'm not a doctor, for me it's very important to have to eat before I exercise. So that's a shoulder flexion. So you do your right arm, and then you do your left arm. And then you have the shoulder abduction. So she puts it right after, but in fact, you're supposed to do it later. Okay, she explains that, but in the slide, she put it right after. So the shoulder abduction, it's the same thing. You sit on a chair without back support, but this time you have no weight cuffs. So what I forgot to say, is before in the shoulder flexion, I started with 0 weight cuffs. And once I reached 60 without the weight cuffs, I bought weight cuffs, but that were 250 grams. And so I didn't go back to 0 on 250 grams. I could feel when I reached the level from before, maybe it would be 20 or 25 with the 250 grams. And then I built up from there. 250 grams, I did 25, then 250 grams, 26, 2 days later, then 27. And once I reached 60, I put 500 gram weights. And then after I put 750 gram weights, and then I put 1 kilo. So it's really something where you have to be very, very patient because you don't get there in 2 months. I reached the maximum level in maybe in a year. So here you have the kilo. And also what I do is I have a chalkboard and I write the number for each exercise on my chalkboard because or else I forget. And I say, oh, how many did I do last time? 13 of this exercise and 20 of that. And then it's all mixed up. So I just wrote down on the chalkboard in my I have a small sports room, exercise room. And I just write it down with chalk and I erase it and I add 1 for the next time, every time. So the shoulder abduction is no weights. So there's no weight cuff around the wrist. You perform as many repetitions as you possibly can, and then you switch sides. The pace is the same, and the maximal number of repetitions is 60. So the same thing, you build from 1, or whatever it is for you, which corresponds to 4. The head lift. So this for me was very difficult because there was a point where when I couldn't even raise my head off the pillow. So you're lying on the bench with horizontal head support. You have no pillow. And you lift your head as much as possible, and then you put it down. And the same thing, you always put the metronome, and 40 beats a minute is still the same thing, and 20 repetitions per minute, and maximum number of repetitions 60. And so it's there's another exercise my PT told me, which is just you lie down and you put your head up. Instead of putting up and down, you just keep it up. But she doesn't talk about it. So try the head lift. I did the head lift until I reached 60. I thought it was really a very difficult exercise. And when I walked during the summer, if I stopped doing my exercises, even for 2 weeks, and I tried the head lift again, I was way back down again. It was really something for me where I lost probably one of the muscles where I lost the most if I didn't train. Probably because in everyday life, I don't use it that much. The next exercise is the hip flexion. So lying on the bench with pillow, this time under your head. I do it on the floor. I put an exercise mat. you have the straight leg raise. So you raise your heel 40 centimeters from the floor. So 40 centimeters is roughly this. You're not supposed to go too high. In fact, it's the most difficult one. It's 40 centimeters. And you go up and down, up and down. You try 60, and then you switch, and you do the other leg. The pace is 40 beats a minute, 20 repetitions a minute, and the maximal number of repetitions is 60. There are no weights. Now I put weights. When I still do this exercise, even though I do the intensive resistance training, but I put weights on my legs. But this is just the beginning, and it's difficult. The step test. So this is, the step. So you use a 20 centimeter high stool, 40 centimeters away from the wall. You put one hand on the wall for balance support, and you go up just with one leg. Like you will go up using, it's your right leg that goes on the stool, and then you go down. And then you put your leg up on the stool again, and then you go down. And you perform as many repetitions as possible. And then you switch leg, you put your left leg up, and then you go down. And it's all, you use it with the metronome too. This is the step test. Then there's a heel lift. So you're just standing with your heels on the ground, and you try and heighten yourself on your toes. You stand with one hand on the wall for balance support. You lift your heels at least 1 centimeter from the floor. And this you do more times. You go up to 120. And this is quicker. It's 80 beats per minute. And you have the toe lift. So you're leaning against the wall and you lift your toes. And this is the same rhythm as the heel lift. It's 80 beats a minute. So your heels are supposed to be 15 centimeters from the wall, and you just lift your toes. Today, I still do the heel lift and the toe lift. I haven't done it during the holidays because I've been hiking, but I'm going to, and now there's a heat wave in France, but once the heat wave is over, I'm going to do them again. So this is the functional index. So as it is to take as an exam. And I did, thanks to Jerry, 2.5 years ago, I had a video conference with Dr. Chung from Johns Hopkins. And I learned that at Johns Hopkins, they use the functional index not only to test, but to help to train people who have myositis to improve their muscle disease. So Helene Alexanderson says that's what we're supposed to do. And obviously, well, I was very glad to learn that what I was doing at home, they were doing it at Johns Hopkins. So once you reach the maximum level of the functional index, and by that time, usually you're feeling you're feeling much better. And if your disease is not active, this is very important, then you can switch to the intensive resistance training. And that's when Dr. Chung from Johns Hopkins, thanks to Jerry that I met, I told him I was at the functional index 2 maximum level, but I didn't know if I could do the intensive resistance training. And he wasn't my doctor, but he was really nice, and he answered, and he said, if you can do the functional index 2, then you can do the intensive resistance training. So I explained to my PT again, I bought a muscle building machine, and my PT was very nice, and she said, but you're going to hurt yourself. I can't help you. I don't want you to hurt yourself. And I said, I don't have a choice. You have to help me learn how to do these exercises. And so she was worried, but she helped me, and it really helped. I felt it just gives a feeling of you just feel great after the exercise when you push. And the research in Sweden shows that when you force your muscles, in fact, not only do you help your muscles fight the disease, but you create more muscle fibers. And it's true. I know that I had absolutely no muscles, and now I'm stronger than I was before. And I could do up to recently 40 push-ups, and I couldn't even do one. So now I'm going to switch to the intensive resistance training. So this is the second PowerPoint. The home exercise program developed for PM and DM. So you can see the references, Helene Alexanderson, So I'm just using her slide. So a home exercise program, if you recently were diagnosed with PM or DM, you go into a flare. So she starts her slide again with the intensive resistance training. So here are the exercises, you know, the warm-up with, she says the warm-up with a step, and then you have shoulder mobility. So with the shoulder mobility, it's a sort of an elastic that's attached to the ceiling, and the elastic goes through it, and you push your arms up and down. And with my PT, we didn't have that. So we really did the exercises from the functional index. So globally, if you see, you have the strength on the shoulders, you have hip extensors, you have hip flexors, the neck flexors. So she adds a few more exercises. There's also grip strength. So that's not in the functional index 2, but I bought a grip, and I would just press like the grip just a little. And then after I press it a little harder, and then 2 days later, a little harder. And then I built up to 60 with the grip that I bought in a store. So she sees the type of exercise, she explains the type of exercises when you're in a recent diagnosis or in a flare. So if that's your case, you should see with the PT, because each of these exercises are aimed at people who have our type of disease, because our type of disease affects essentially the proximal muscles. That means the muscles that are in the shoulders and around the hips and the hands and the feet. And so those exercises aim to help us improve those muscles. How to use the home exercise program. So you start with a physical therapist if possible. You start with 10 repetitions of each exercise, if you can. Your perceived exertion should initially not exceed 3-4 out of the 0-10 Borg scale. If needed, you add extra weights using weight cuffs or rubber bands. With improved muscle function and lower disease activity, you should exercise on intensity corresponding to 5-7. Short exercise sessions of 15 to 20 minutes with additional 20 minutes walk 5 days a week during the first 12 weeks. So here she gives very specific type of information. I know when I did the functional index 2 exercises, at the beginning it was just 5 minutes because I just did it once. But once you reach to the 60 level, maximum level, you're roughly in half an hour. And then I would walk. At the beginning, I would try and walk, but after my goal was 1 hour a day. And so now I still do 1 hour a day walk with my stretching. And the other day I do 1 hour walk and half an hour of muscle building. And even though I'm still fine, I continue doing it. Be sure to change between exercise, upper and lower limbs. For example, don't do all upper limbs tasks in a row, but rather perform according to the sequence on the previous slide. So you do up and then down. So this is the Borg scale. When to start? So you're supposed to start when you have a recent diagnosis after about 4 weeks following introduction of prednisone treatment. You and your rheumatologist should note some clinical signs of improvement before starting. So that really, I was really surprised that it was so quickly after. But because for me, my doctors had told me, no, you're not supposed to walk. If it hurts, don't do anything. And so obviously I went just downhill very fast. And I had to tell my doctor, I think I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. And so I just didn't listen to my doctors, and I did what Helene Alexanderson said. And so I proved to them that, well, there was research done abroad, which was very interesting. Be sure to assess muscle function and aerobic capacity before starting, and then follow up after about 3 months. With improvement, progress intensity, or try other types of exercise. Right. So she says to try other types of exercise, such as aquatic training. So aquatic training really gives you, I haven't done it, but apparently from the other patients that I know who've done it, it gives you really a great physical sensation because you're floating in the water and you can feel your arms moving as you haven't felt them moving since you've had the disease or since you've had that flare. But aquatic training is sort of the basic because it's not as strong as the functional index because the weight carries your body. So it's a sort of a pre-functional index 2, but it's very important in order to get to the functional index 2. You have gym exercises and you have Nordic walking or biking and any exercise that you enjoy. Frequent walking, so she encourages frequent walking to improve aerobic capacity. You should walk or do other aerobic physical activity at least 20 to 30 minutes, at least 2 to 3 days a week on an intensity of 50 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. So the maximum heart rate is usually 220 minus your age, and that's the maximum. So you try and build up from there. I would walk every single day. I still do walk every single day. But she says at least 2 to 3 days a week. So she's a specialist. So, but that's when she explains after your maximum heart rate, and check your heart rate manually or by using a heart rate monitor. And also you should know going shopping is not walking. Intensive resistance training, when you have low activity, lower prednisone doses, and the stable phase of disease. So when I started the intensive resistance training, that was a year and a half ago, and I was on Cellcept 2500, and I was on prednisone 5. And today I'm on Cellcept 2000. I decreased in May, and I'm on prednisone 5. I'm still on prednisone 5. We'll decrease, if everything goes well, to 1000 Cellcept in December. And once I'm down to 0 on Cellcept, if that happens, we will see if I still need the prednisone. But for the moment, because I have MDA5 and I have lung fibrosis, we're keeping it at this. So the intensive resistance training, this program is contraindicated if you have severe osteoporosis and have experienced fractures. If you have prednisone doses exceeding 20 milligrams a day, and if you have severe arthritis. So I have arthritis, so what I do is I use my hands, but I also have a tumor, but it's a benign tumor on a finger. So I don't carry the weights with my right hand. I put a strap against my right wrist because or else I hurt myself. So you can adapt the weights according to what you can do. It's not necessarily pushing with your hands. It can be around your wrists. It can be further up your arm, according to what you feel most comfortable with. So here she shows the type of exercises. So you're supposed to do 3 sets of 10 repetitions on 10 voluntary repetition maximum. So this was really complicated. I had to translate this with my PT without understanding what I was translating. Originally, once you're during stable disease, you ask your PT, she had plenty of different weights, and you take a weight and you try and see what is the maximum weight you can pick. You can put over your head, for instance, 10 times, but not 11. And that you calculate 70% of that weight is going to be your maximal strength. So you do 3 sets of 10. So you start with the top, then you do the bottom, the top, the bottom, etc. And at each time it's maximum 10 repetitions, whereas before you were getting to 60. This time it's 10, and it's 3 times. So you have the deltoids with the weights, and you have the quadriceps. So here you put the weights on your ankles. You have the lat dorsi biceps. You have so I don't know how to pronounce that, and you have the trunk and neck. So I bought a special weightlifting machine, and I just showed the slide to my PT, and she told me on my muscle machine what the exercises were that corresponded, because I didn't have exactly the type of machine she had. So we just saw what it was, and I started at a level of 7 on the Borg scale and built up to 3 sets of 10 repetition. And from my memory, I reached 70% of the maximum strength. I didn't start at that. So she says it reduces, right, improves muscle strength and endurance, and it reduces disease activity and inflammation. And I remember I told my doctor, because of the PT at the beginning, she didn't want to do it. And I told my doctor, but she's afraid I'm going to hurt myself. And she says, don't worry, tell her to do it anyway, because you're not going to listen to her, you're going to do it anyway, just as you do with me. And because I'm very, because I live in France and I speak English and I could read all the research, and the doctors here don't. So I was just doing what the research was saying and not what the doctors. They were. Well, my GP was absolutely fabulous and still is. And so my PT helped me doing all those exercises. So how to get started and apply resistance. So you get started under supervision of PT if possible. You start on lower loads, allowing 20 VRM. So that's 20 repetitions, about 50% of maximal strength. That's it. So before you calculate what you can do 10 times, but not 11. And you reach your aim is to reach 70%, but you start at 50% of maximal strength. So no, you do 20, which you can do 20, and you do 50% of that. And then your aim is to go up to 70% of what you can do 10 times. So it's a bit complicated. You'll need a little more time because I'm talking fast, but you have the slides to figure it out. Always warm up before exercising, and don't forget to stretch. So my warm-up was always the step. I did the 60 steps on one side, the 60 steps on another, and then I would do the exercises from the intensive resistance training. And I'll talk about the stretch later. So to achieve effect on muscle function, you have to exercise at least 2 days a week, but never 2 days in a row. And eventually reach the goal intensity of 10 voluntary repetitions maximum, 70% of max. That's it. So I always did every 2 days. I never not did every 2 days, and never 2 days in a row. Because if you do 2 days in a row, you can really hurt yourself and you don't let your muscles relax, rest in between. So you do 1 day and then you stop and you do the other day. And so you have to sort of organize your days so there's time for you, where you do your exercises, you do in the morning or you do it in the afternoon, according to your schedule, but you have to plan that schedule in it. And so for the past roughly 4 years, every day, 1 day, there's an hour and a half, 1 hour for walking, half an hour for stretching. And the other day, there's 2 hours, 1 hour for walking, half an hour for the intensive resistance training, and half an hour for the stretching. And I've done that every single day. It is normal to experience muscle soreness a couple of days after exercise, especially in the beginning or after increasing loads. So you always feel a slight soreness, but it's not a big pain. And I know when I started the intensive resistance training, it was just absolutely incredible. And I told my doctor, but I feel so great after. I can't believe that I wasn't doing this. And it seems paradoxical. That's the way I felt it at the time, but I just felt incredibly well after my intensive resistance training. And it's a need. I really need to do it. If I just stay lazy all day in the couch and I go, I don't want to do my exercises, I'm just so comfortable here, and I'm thinking, no, you have to do it. And when I get up, if you spent all day, lying on the couch talking, and you get up, you feel, I'm not feeling well. I go down, I do my exercises, I do my stretching, I come back, I feel absolutely great. So I'm convinced. During exercise, you should not exceed perceived exertion of 7. So that means on the Borg scale, I'm going to go back. When you're on 7, that means it's very strong. So it's hard. When you do it, it's hard. It's even very hard, but it's not extremely hard, but it's very hard. And you should always be able to be active during the rest of the day. So that's interesting. When you do it, after you're stretching, and of course you're going to feel tired because you've been exercising and walking and all that, but you should be able to have a stable activity level every day. If the next day you can't do anything because you're just too tired, then you have to decrease what you're doing and build up progressively. Because there are sometimes people, they do a lot and the next day they don't do anything. And then after they do a lot and the next day they don't do everything. But then you can't manage your life. So it's better to just decrease and then build up progressively so that you know roughly you can go to work every day, or you can go out and things like that. You can skip a day. I think it's better if you do it every 2 days. But if it's really a day that's very important and you don't do it, then you don't do it. It's 3 times a week. I used to do it every 2 days because I really wanted to do it at maximum. So joint pain during exercise does not mean that the loads are too high. However, use lower loads if joints tend to swollen and be painful after exercise. So I bought those freeze packs that I put around my knees because I have synovitis in my knees and my wrists and fingers. So I bought those packs that you can wrap around for 5 minutes after to get them to de-swell. I don't do it anymore, but sometimes if I over-exercise, like when I was in the Alps, I just put ice on it. As long as you feel that you get stronger and healthier, continue. If you don't experience improvements or you get weaker, then you stop. You contact your PT or rheumatologist. So this is the Borg scale. Aerobic exercise, if you have low activity disease, has shown even better results on muscle function and disease activity than the previous presenter resistance training program. So every time they do muscle biopsies and everything on people who do exercise, it always shows that exercise is good for your muscles. So this is aerobic and endurance. So this is if you're walking or if you can do bicycle. So she said 3 times a week. So this is the experiment they did. 3 times a week for 12 weeks. They asked people to cycle 30 minutes with a load of 70% of VO2 max. So I talked about it with my PT, but it's just too technical. I don't have the machine and everything. But it was interesting. And then 20 minutes of muscle endurance, 30% of the 1 VRM. And the result, so she explains the result. And so it's more for doctors than for me. But it improves, what's written is that it improves your muscle strength and endurance. It improves your ability to perform daily activities. It improves quality of life, physical function, general health, and vitality, because you don't feel fatigued, you feel energized. And it reduces disease activity and inflammation. So this slide is creatine, supplementation, and exercise in myositis. So you can look at it, but I didn't do it. I talked about it with my doctor, and she said, so long as I'm progressing, might as well not take something, a supplement. But you have to talk about it with your doctor. So she explains the creatine dose and the health benefits from regular physical activity. So there's a strong association between aerobic capacity and health, both in healthy and myositis patients. Regular physical activity and exercise can improve quality of life, reduce risk of type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, and cardiovascular disease, and reduce high blood pressure. And individuals' inflammatory rheumatic diseases are at higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease. So that's an extra reason why we should exercise. So the take-home message is exercise should be designed individually and adapted to disease activity and disability with regular follow-up during active disease. I remember one of the doctors said during one of the conferences, so you remain at the functional index of the intensive resistance training, but if you have a flare again, you go back down to functional index. And so it ensures that throughout your life, so long as you don't have a major flare, like I've had when you can't move anymore, but if you feel you have a flare, like for me, it was my hair falling, the skin disease, it would be the lungs, either or all at the same time, well, then you decrease to the functional index. And when you're at the functional index, you can still function. You lose around 50%, but you can still function, and you build up gradually. So, but besides the first year and a half, when I had several flares and the lungs were going down, since I've been on CellCept, it's been uphill. Active progressive exercise should be recommended to patients in all stages of disease, and always think it's better to do something rather than nothing. So even if you start at 1, well, even if it's not completely 1, even if it's a quarter of 1, you just get your hand up. Well, you start there and you build up. I mean, we call this patience. You need patience.
And that's the huge difference from what we were told originally, like you had mentioned before, when we were first diagnosed, many of us were told no exercise at all. And this is exactly what we need, is like it says, it's better to do something than nothing.
Yeah. I remember my doctor, there was a point during the first months of the disease. So it was way downhill in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. I couldn't move anymore. They gave me the prednisone. I could walk, and I could walk again, but they told me not to exercise because or else I would be hurting myself. And by December, I wasn't walking anymore. And so my GP, my doctor, had to come to my home to see me every week or every 2 weeks. And in December, I remember I told her, I was sleeping 18 hours a day. I was completely exhausted. But I was looking up on the internet in English and all the research. And I told my doctor, I think I'm doing the opposite of what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be walking. And I told her, next time I'm going to your office. You're not coming to my home. She lives at the end of the street. So I said, I'm going to your office. And I started going out and just walking 4 steps in the street. And then the next day was 8 steps in the street. And then the next day and for 6 months, I had somebody holding my arm and helping me. But the 2 weeks later, I went to her office and I walked to her office. And it was I started with 4 steps. And I needed somebody because or else, I could fall. And there was no way I could get up if I fell because I was just in such a state. But I started with those 4 steps. And I proved that she was wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to have those goals. And it's interesting. And this is a question that I've wanted to ask you about. You have the MDA5 antibody, which for those that don't know, really can cause severe progressive interstitial lung disease, which Fiona has had, and thankful that she's.
I still have.
Yeah, thankful that she's feeling better, but she still has the fibrosis. So when you started the functional Index-2, how were your lungs at that time?
Well, I knew my lungs. I knew I had fibrosis because I'd read there was a special sign that I had is I couldn't inhale completely. Like I couldn't inhale. And then when I reached a little, there was a sort of a blockage. And then I could continue inhaling. And I looked it up on the internet and I saw that was a sign of ILD. And I told my doctor, because my doctors at the hospital didn't think I had dermatomyositis. They refused to say I had it. And I told my doctor, what is this thing? I think I have dermatomyositis. I think I have interstitial. I have interstitial. It's the beginning of interstitial lung disease. And then you don't have it. You don't have it. But then I was really mad. And I had a young doctor at the hospital, and I told him, but you're not testing all the antibodies. I want you to test the antibodies now. I was really furious. And at the end I said, so what are we doing now? And he said, well, we're going to take the blood test. And when we took the blood test, it came back MDA5. And he said, it's not possible. And so he refused to say I had dermatomyositis. He refused to say I had MDA5. But I saw my GP, my regular doctor, and I said, my God, I have MDA5. I've done the research. Dermatomyositis is horrible. But MDA5 is absolutely terrible. And there's a major percentage, I'm going to have this lung disease and I have this thing. And so I saw she sent me to a lung specialist who wasn't working for the hospital. So I had to explain to her, you can imagine how stupid you feel. You're a patient, you have to say, I think I have dermatomyositis, but the main specialists don't think you do. I think I have MDA5. Please, breathing is psychological. I need to know if I'm okay. And she did the tests. That was in March, so that was roughly, it started in August. So a few months later, and my lung function was at 80%. And I was starting the exercises with my PT, but she was going too hard. And it was only in June when she left on holiday that I realized, almost a year later, that it wasn't good. because she left on a holiday and it wasn't hurting anymore. And that's when I started doing the functional Index-2. By that time, in December, my lung function test was down to 59%. I sent my blood 400 kilometers away from here to have it tested again for MDA5. I had a CT scan, and my husband had to go and get mad at the hospital to tell them, finally, I just give all the proof that I have my disease. Please take care of my wife. And that's when they acknowledged that I had dermatomyositis, but they still say I don't have MDA5. So I had to go to Paris, prove it, and now I'm followed by a doctor in England. Yeah, at the beginning, I didn't have any lung disease. It was very progressive. I didn't have the, there's rapidly progressive interstitial lung disease. I didn't have that one. I had the slowly progressive. My lung function test was down to, my DLCO was down to 59%, and the rest was in the low 70s. And now my DLCO is at 82 or 84, and the rest is at 100%. So thanks to CellCept, I'm back to normal. Okay, so now the stretching for the last part. So the stretching for me is very, very important, because I realized very early that when you walk, when your disease is still active, but even for me, it's not active, but I still feel it. So I know the disease is there. If you walk, after a while, even if, let's say, you're downtown and you're just gently walking or just standing up, after a while, if you want to sit down in your car, it's really difficult. And it's as if, so this is not research, this is really personal feeling, but I think that transmitting your feelings, the sensations you have of the disease is important. It's as if I have the impression that when you walk and you do slow steps, little steps, in fact, your muscles contract. And after a while, if you do these slow steps and always the same steps, well, they can't expand anymore. And so I get the feeling that I need to stretch to get my muscles to expand again, and then to feel well. And so sometimes when the disease was active, I would have to stretch after maybe, I would walk half an hour maximum, but I would stretch 3 or 4 times in between. And then I could continue walking, and then I would have to stretch again. And then after, there was a time when I could walk several, let's say an hour. And this summer, so I was hiking maybe 8 hours. So when I stopped walking, every time I would stretch, like after to eat lunch. If you stop for an hour, then I would stretch 5-10 minutes, my arms and my legs, and then I would walk again for 4 or 5 hours, and I would stretch in the evening. But to this day, if I walk an hour, I mean, I can hike and everything, but if I walk an hour, I go back home, I stretch. If I'm anywhere, if I walk for a long time, wherever I'll be, I'll do my stretching. And the stretching is mainly in the shoulders and the hips. So this is my husband's. It's a bit high for me, but it doesn't matter. So I just put my 2 walking sticks in front of me, and I just bend forward. And this really unstretches the muscles in the shoulders. So I put it like this straight, and then after, I just turn a little. And what's important is when you stretch, you don't do this. That is very bad. In fact, you once you feel it stretch, you stop and you wait 10 seconds. And then after, I turn a little, and I sort of go all the way around. And it helps build up until my arms are like this on the side. And you can feel it stretch. It just feels absolutely great. So you take a little time. You drink water always. So this is mainly for my arms and my legs. So I start with my arms, then I go down to my legs. So my legs is roughly, you put your feet on the table and you go like this. And sometimes you go like this. And what I found interesting is when you do this exercise, you twist. And you twist so that the muscles that are here, they stretch. So you twist like this. You wait 10 seconds. Then you go like this. So I just turn the other foot on the floor around, and it makes my body turn. And I go like this. And it helps here, and it helps on the other side too. And or else it's mainly a type of stretching exercises. So I stretch for half an hour. So I do that exercise, the other exercise. On the floor, I sort of do yoga exercises. And I lie down, just lying down and putting your arms over your head can be really difficult. For me, it was very difficult. Now I can do it. But at the beginning, like my arms will be on the floor next to my head. But at the beginning, my arms they weren't like this. Huh? They were like this. They couldn't touch the floor. But you just leave it until it starts hurting, but you don't push and you wait. And then you try to push a little harder and then you wait. And it's really over time that it gets better. So you try and find different exercises where you twist. You twist like this. You put them over. Everything that feels nice here. And around the hips. And so that's what I do. And roughly I take maybe maximum half an hour to stretch. It's important to drink while you stretch and to stretch immediately after you've stopped your exercise. Don't wait 5 minutes because your muscles contract. As soon as you stop, your muscles are still warm, you do your stretching.
I've been in PT now for, I guess, 8 months or so. You know, I go twice a week, but I'm looking to probably add some hydrotherapy. I have a gym membership, so I had spoken to my PT about it. But I definitely want to go back and rewatch this and just see what I can add on my own on the days that I'm not doing PT. You know, to just bolster my, I think what I have more trouble with now is my muscle strength is coming back. It's my endurance. So I need to work on that endurance piece.
Do you have any tips on that, Fiona?
Well, obviously you're the point where I was at the beginning, the first year. So it's the first part of the video with the functional index. If your PT is familiar with the functional index, then she'll know. But if she isn't, you can do what I do. What I did is you just bring the slide, the research, and you say, this is what I'm supposed to build on. Can you tell me what I could work on?
Okay.
And you start low. You start at 1. If you can just do the arm raise just once, you do it once. And then the next day, that's what I started on. I started with 1. And then 2 days, and then maybe she can work on that during the sessions, or she'll tell you, she'll adapt. Or maybe according to the exercises you're already doing, she can tell you which ones you can take home.
Okay, good.
One for the other day. Because, or else if 2 is the minimum. But according, I thought sometimes you just regress and you don't feel yourself progressing because there's those 4 days in between. And I felt the need to have that extra session that I did at home. So I saw my PT also twice a week for many, many months. And so I started adding, and I decreased a lot and added an extra day. Thanks everybody for listening to this video. I hope it helps. It's not easy, but the functional index and the Helene Alexanderson exercises really helped me, and I hope it helps you too. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Fiona, thank you so much for sharing all of your experience with us and for the slides and just for answering questions and being there for others who are trying to do the same things that you did in order to get better. We thank you for joining us. Learn more about myositis and exercise, including the slides from the session today at understandingmyositis.org/exercise. To see upcoming video support, education, and activity sessions, please visit understandingmyositis.org/events.